The smell of chalk dust filled the air, dry and suffocating. To Samuel, each particle seemed to scratch his throat. The teacher, Mr. Dubois, with his deep, impatient voice, pointed to the geometry equation on the blackboard. "It's your turn, Samuel. Come up here and solve it." The boy walked slowly, feeling the gaze of all his classmates like needles on his skin. He picked up the chalk. The texture was horrible, dry and porous. Instead of numbers, his fingers began to trace spirals, orbits, points of light connected by thin lines. "What is this?" growled the teacher. "Are you kidding me? I asked for the area of the triangle, not a map of scribbles. What planet do you live on, boy? The planet of useless people?" He snatched the chalk from Samuel's hand and furiously erased the stars. "From what corner of Brazil or the world are you watching us? Think about the last time you looked up at the night sky and felt small but amazed. Now imagine someone trying to erase that feeling from you. Stay with us, because the answer to the teacher's question, 'What planet do you live on?' would come the next day, in a way that would silence everyone and change a life forever. Subscribe so you don't miss a single detail of this twist. Mateo was a man who fixed things. In his mechanic's workshop, broken engines and jammed transmissions all made sense. There was a logic, an order. You found the problem, replaced the part, and the engine roared back to life. He looked at his son, Samuel, and felt like the most incompetent man alive. He couldn't fix his son's silence. There was no instruction manual for that unique mind. He loved Samuel with a raw power, a love that left him frustrated and lost. He remembered trying to teach Samuel to kick a ball. He would buy the ball and go to the park full of hope. "Look, son, this is how you do it." But Samuel didn't look at the ball. His eyes were fixed on the clouds, on the way the sunlight passed through them, on the patterns the wind drew in the sky. Mateo kicked the ball against the wall again and again, in a lonely demonstration of how a father and son should be. Each bounce of the ball on the ground was an echo of his own failure. He wanted to share his world with his son, but it seemed that Samuel lived in a parallel universe, light years away. At night, the anguish deepened. His wife, Elena, researched, read, and sought support groups with tireless strength. Mateo, on the other hand, closed himself off. His pain was different. It was the pain of a provider who doesn't know how to provide what matters most: his son's happiness. He saw other parents talking about grades, sports, girlfriends. And him? What would he say? "My son spent the afternoon drawing maps of stars that no one knows." Fear consumed him. Fear that the world would hurt Samuel, label him, crush him. He felt weak because he didn't know how to build armor to protect this boy who was so bright and so fragile. His outbursts weren't tears but the oil that stained his hands, the excessive force with which he tightened a nut, the heavy silence he shared with his son, two worlds close together but unable to touch. The search for help was a maze of closed doors and condescending smiles. The first stop was the public health system. After months on the waiting list, they got an appointment with an occupational therapist who seemed to be following a script. She handed Samuel modeling clay and building blocks, expecting him to build a house or a car. Instead, Samuel used the blocks to create a three-dimensional representation of the Orion constellation. The therapist wrote on her clipboard, "Difficulty following instructions, repetitive behavior." Mateo and Elena's hope turned to dust. They decided to pay for a private specialist, a renowned psychologist who charged a fortune. His method was behavioral intervention therapy. The goal was to normalize Samuel's behavior, teach him to make eye contact, to give appropriate social responses. The therapy was torment. Samuel, who was calm in his own world, became anxious and agitated. The sessions ended with him cowering in a corner, his hands over his ears. The psychologist said it was necessary to break his resistance. Elena said it was breaking her son's spirit. The last straw came when a well-meaning but completely unprepared school counselor suggested that perhaps the problem was a lack of normal interests. "Why don't you enroll him in soccer? Or judo? He needs to let out that energy, be more like other boys." The suggestion was so absurd, so far removed from who Samuel was, that it seemed like a cruel joke. Every attempt at outside help seemed to want to erase Samuel's essence, prune his most unique branches so that he would fit into the tight box of normality. The false hope cost money, time, and, most of all, their trust. They realized that the real experts on their son were not the professionals with diplomas on the wall, but themselves, and they would have to find the way on their own. Mr. Dubois didn't see himself as a villain. He was an old-school math and science teacher. For him, the universe was governed by laws, formulas, and correct answers. Order, discipline, and measurable results were the pillars of his pedagogy. Samuel was anarchy in his perfectly ordered classroom. The boy did not refuse to learn out of defiance. He simply did not learn the way Mr. Dubois taught. While the teacher explained photosynthesis on the board, Samuel's mind was on the physics of light, on how photons traveled millions of miles to reach the leaf of the tree outside the window. The teacher saw the drawings of galaxies in Samuel's notebooks not as a passion, but as a symptom of inattention, an insult to his class. The humiliation at the blackboard was the culmination of months of frustration, the bursting point for a rigid man confronted by a mind he was unable to measure and therefore unable to value. The conflict extended into the home. Elena was a lioness protecting her cub. She saw the genius in Samuel's drawings, the beauty in his intense focus. She was ready to fight the school, the doctors, the world if necessary. Matteo, on the other hand, was torn by a torturous dilemma. He also saw his son's intelligence, but his fear of the future paralyzed him. How is he going to get a job, Elena? How is he going to live in this world if he can't even look at people? His concern was practical, earthly, and clashed with Elena's unconditional acceptance. Arguments were frequent, born not out of a lack of love, but out of two different visions of how to protect the same person. Elena wanted to build a universe for Samuel, while Matteo wanted to give Samuel the tools to survive in the universe that already existed. The biggest conflict, however, was Samuel's conflict with himself. He didn't understand why the sound of the school bell hurt his ears so much. He didn't understand why people said one thing with their mouths, but their faces seemed to say another. The human world was confusing, illogical, and noisy, but the world outside, the world of the sky, was perfect. The stars followed rules, the orbits were predictable, the galaxies danced a cosmic waltz of stunning beauty. Drawing was his way of translating the chaos of the world into order. It was his language, his peace, his way of making sense. He wasn't refusing to participate. He was trying to survive, using the stars as his shield and his map. The turning point did not happen in a doctor's office or at a school meeting. It happened on a rainy night, on the small screen of an old computer. A documentary about extrasolar planets was playing on television. The narrator talked about the TRAPPIST-1 system, a fascinating set of planets orbiting a dwarf star. They showed a computer animation of the orbits. Samuel, who was on the floor drawing, stopped. He got up and approached the screen. His eyes narrowed. He shook. His head, a subtle gesture of disagreement. He went to the computer. With the help Elena had already given him to navigate his favorite astronomy websites, he found the website of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, the institution behind the animation. He found a contact section. He didn't know how to write a formal email, but he knew how to express himself in his own way. In a drawing program, he recreated the TRAPPIST-1 system, but with a subtle correction to the orbital resonance of two of the planets, a detail that, according to his visual intuition, made the system more stable. He attached the drawing to an email and wrote just 3 words in the body of the text: "This is wrong," and he sent it. The email landed in a general inbox, monitored by thousands of spam messages, conspiracy theories, and questions from children. But it was seen by an astrophysics intern named Maya. Intrigued by the simplicity of the message and the complexity of the attached drawing, she didn't delete it. She forwarded it to her supervisor with a note. "Probably nothing, but the visual math in this drawing is elegant." It was a small act, a mouse click, a decision not to ignore it. It was enough. The silent turning point was a drawing sent into digital space, a whisper that, by a twist of fate, was heard on the other side of the bureaucratic universe. That email, sent into the void, changed the dynamic within the home. Matteo and Elena were unaware of their son's achievement, but the intensity with which he had devoted himself to that drawing ignited a new flame. Matteo, on impulse, used his savings to buy a small telescope. On the first clear night, he set it up in the backyard. The assembly was a disaster, but Samuel approached and silently began to point to the pieces, showing his father the correct order of assembly. It was the first time Samuel had ever taught Matteo anything. When they finally managed to focus on Jupiter, the victory was monumental. Matteo looked through the lens and saw the giant planet and its 4 Galilean moons, exactly as Samuel had drawn them hundreds of times. Elena brought hot chocolate, and the 3 of them stood there in the cold night, taking turns at the telescope. Samuel didn't speak, but he pointed. He took his father's hand and his mother's hand and guided them to adjust the focus. That night, they weren't a family with a problem. They were explorers. They were a team. The victories became more frequent. Samuel began, leaving his drawings on the kitchen table. They were star maps of frightening accuracy, notes on the rotation speed of pulsars, diagrams on the possibility of finding water on distant moons. Elena bought college-level astrophysics books. Samuel didn't read them cover to cover, but he absorbed the diagrams, the photos, the equations. Matteo built him a command station in his bedroom, a large desk with good lighting. He stopped worrying about whether his son would be a mechanic and began to wonder if he would be an astronomer. The house, once a place of tense silence, became an observatory filled with quiet, vibrant curiosity. Their love found a common language, the language of the cosmos. One night, Matteo was in his workshop cleaning his grease-stained hands and found himself thinking about Mr. Dubois. He felt a pang of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a strange sense of pity. The teacher lived in a world of right and wrong answers, a small, defined world. He was incapable of seeing the immensity that existed within his son. Matteo realized that for a long time, he had also been a bit like Mr. Dubois. He remembered his own frustration, his desire for a normal son. He looked at his hands that knew how to fix any engine, and understood the irony. He had spent his entire life fixing things that moved on the ground, while his son was born to navigate the skies. His fear was not for Samuel, but for himself. Fear of not being the father that this extraordinary boy needed. He was trying to force a spaceship to work like a car. The acceptance he found was not passive. It was active and full of admiration. He realized that Samuel's strength did not lie in what he lacked in social terms, but in what he had in terms of perception. His son could see the silent music that governs the universe. He could find order in the apparent chaos of the cosmos. That boy, his son, was not lost in reverie. He was a cartographer of distant worlds. The pride Matteo felt at that moment was as vast and brilliant as the Milky Way that Samuel loved to draw so much. He finally understood that his job was not to fix his son, but to ensure that he had the best possible launching pad. It was a Wednesday morning. Mr. Dubois was writing on the blackboard, the same smell of chalk in the air. Samuel was at his desk, drawing the structure of a nebula in his notebook. Suddenly, there was a knock at the classroom door. The principal entered, her face pale and anxious. Behind her were 2 visitors, a man and a woman, dressed in professional attire that was completely out of place in a school environment. On their badges was an unmistakable logo, NASA. "Excuse me, Mr. Dubois," said the principal. "This is Dr. Reed and Dr. Chen. They need to speak with one of your students." A shocked silence fell over the class. Mr. Dubois, visibly irritated by the interruption, asked, "And who would that be?" Dr. Chen looked around the room, her eyes scanning the confused students until they landed on Samuel. "We're looking for Samuel Ricci." Matteo and Elena had been called to the school and watched from the doorway, not understanding what was happening. Dr. Reed approached Samuel's desk, completely ignoring the teacher. He knelt down to be at the boy's level. "Samuel?" he said in a calm, respectful voice. "We received your email, the one about TRAPPIST-1. He opened a folder and took out a color printout of the drawing Samuel had sent. "You were right. There was an error in our simulation. Your intuitive correction helped us recalibrate the model. We spent weeks running the numbers, and your version is more stable. We'd like to talk to you about how you came to that conclusion." The entire room held its breath. The students looked from Samuel to the NASA visitors and back, their brains trying to process the scene. Mr. Dubois was paralyzed, the chalk in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief and humiliation. The question he had asked with such contempt, "What planet do you live on?" had just been answered. Samuel lived on a planet NASA wanted to visit. He didn't look up. He just pushed his notebook, open to the page with the nebula, toward Dr. Reed. It was his answer. The journey wasn't over, but in that moment, in front of everyone who had underestimated him, the universe bowed to recognize one of its own. Not every wandering mind is lost. Some are just mapping new stars. Samuel's story shows us that sometimes those who seem furthest away are the ones who see the furthest. If this story moved you and made you look at the sky in a different way, like it, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Share this message. Someone out there may have a little star cartographer at home, just waiting for someone to believe in them.